Hey guys, and welcome back for another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. I'm Jack, and I'm here with Liam.
Oh. Did that startle you? So sorry.
So, in today's video, guys, we're going to be talking about who we think the best narrator of Supermassive Games is. Okay, mate, so I'm going to throw the mic over to you. We wanted to start with the Curator, right?
Yeah, so the Curator is going to be a bit of an anomaly. Like, we'll just say a few things we like or hate about him. But at the end of the day, the problem with the Curator is that his story has not concluded. We have no idea if we're going to love the Curator, hate the Curator. I think you're the same as me, mate, aren't you? Where a lot is riding on what they're going to do with Season 2 and potentially future seasons with him, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I suppose there's something to distinguish here in terms of the curator himself, whether it's the voice, the aesthetic, the area that he's in, you know, the lines he delivers, all fantastic, all top notch. I think there is something to be said. It's how he's used further down the line that could really sort of sway what our opinions are of him. Like me personally, I hope that he does have like a story arc of some sort, that maybe he does tie into this Rock Pictures universe that gets revealed at some point down the line. I don't know. There's theories about, you know, the ferryman, whether he's Death, whether he's, you know, Death's assistant. I don't know. But it is very much a time will tell. But like I say, I do really like everything else that surrounds the Curator.
Yeah, like everything from his chilling British voice by Pip Torrens, it's done to perfection. The whole setting, the way that we'll come back after a chapter and have a bit of breathing room with him and he can lend us a clue or not. You know, he speaks in riddles, and I think it blends really well with the DPA game. But it's just so hard to rate him because I don't know if, like, in Season 2 they're going to try and intertwine him into the story, and then for that matter, if they do, if they're going to absolutely butcher it, it might be that they do something really like horrible and unspeakable with his character, and it leaves a sour taste in our mouths. And for that reason, part of me almost wants him to stay as just a narrator, because he does a very good job at that with the intros of him walking in with the O Death, like the rock version. But at the same time, I would love him to be used in the story if it's done in a good manner. Yeah, I just think he fits the games perfectly, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there was that one negative that I would level, and I don't think it's necessarily him, it could be how he's used. And again, this is a very subjective thing. Maybe it's a bit too obvious that he is an ally for the player. All I know, there could be a big twist and it could be a complete misdirect. But what I think that I'm going to explain about another narrator that we'll cover in a minute is that there's more ambiguity with that particular character, whereas with the Curator it's pretty obvious. Like, he's giving you hints. I know that Cade, one of our biggest fans, was telling me in the comments before about I've actually cut from The Devil in Me that there was going to be this use of the obols, and how like it was originally intended for the obols to be traded so that you could save Erin's life or like characters' lives in the game. But if that was something that they were thinking about, then that tells me that the Curator really is an ally for the player. And I don't know, I guess that I just really like the ambiguity of the narrator that I think we're going to cover next, mate.
Dr. Hill, right, from Until Dawn. What an addition. I don't know if this is true, mate, but I once heard from someone that because Until Dawn constantly got delayed and delayed and delayed, he was a last-minute addition. And you know what? I am so glad he was. I discovered Until Dawn after it came out anyway, so it didn't really affect me having to wait. However, I just think he is such a neat addition to the game. Obviously, when we start out after the prologue, we get these almost like therapy or psychology meetings with him. We're sat down one-on-one. And I've always liked Pete Stormare as an actor. I knew him from the Prison Break season 1 series, where he's really good in that. He's such a talented actor, and off the bat we're doing like these little tests with him where we're looking at the Scarecrow picture and he's telling us how it feels, but he does it in a really chilling nature where we don't know if he's good or bad because he's trying to help us. But you know, I mean, the man's slamming tables, like putting us on the edge of our seat. We don't know what to think, you know, and it's a horror game, and he does so well, doesn't he, mate, at really building that horror feeling that Until Dawn provides.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know what it is, but I've always had this fascination with psychology. So whenever there's sort of like therapy or like psychological sessions going on, I'm weirdly like attracted to it. And for me, this is like the epitome of it. You've got this guy, you don't know whether he's there to help you or not because, you know, like you say, he's slamming tables and, you know, cracking wires at you every now and then. But there's just something about his whole demeanour when he looks at you, you know, on camera, where it feels like he's trying to get into your mind. And as you as the player, like when you're like making these choices and he's sat there like writing things down, you're thinking like, how's this going to come into play later on? So you're already second guessing yourself. So you've already got that engagement there. Whereas I think that's what I mean, like coming back to the point I had about the Curator, where, don't get me wrong, I love the Curator and all the quotes and the hints and things like that. But the relationship, I want to say, is more two-dimensional. It's the relationship with Dr. Hill. You know, you're almost guessing what his intentions and where he is coming from in many ways. So that's what I really dig.
I think the whole story with him is such a roller coaster as well, because we think we're talking to him as a player. We think that we're leaving the Until Dawn lot behind, and he's sat speaking to you, the video gamer, and you're doing these psychology tests where he's asking who your favourite characters are, what your phobias are, and that is another neat thing that none of the other games provide. The fact that we're creating our own horror game where you're picking your phobias, and you might get jump scared by a clown, a zombie, or a scarecrow based off what you've told him. It might be that you're scared of spiders or blood or snakes, and it decorates his desk as well. And I think that's one thing that sets Dr. Hill apart from the other narrators for me, is that we're really personalising a whole game with him. The fact that as the room deteriorates and gets darker throughout the chapters when we keep meeting him, you could have a weird gimp suit in the background, you could have a jar just full of blood, you could have a snake on the table in a jar in front of yourself based off of what you've picked. And it's just really chilling, and the other narrators don't really have that. You always get the same room every time. And there's something about Dr. Hill, mate, I think you would agree as well, where there's just something really personal about him and the choices that we have with him.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say as well, the way he was intrinsically, it comes back to that point of how these narrators are used, how he's woven into the story in such an effective way that you are playing as Josh. That when you're actually playing, I think, is it as Sam, when you find the phone with text messages from Dr. Hill, you find out that he is actually a concerned doctor or therapist, you know, about Josh's welfare, and all of these scenes with Dr. Hill are a figment of Josh's imagination, which in turn characterises and gives Josh a different level of depth. So there's like so many things at play here that make me feel that this is why Dr. Hill works so well as a narrator in this game.
Because he's in the game a lot less, because, like, obviously when the twist is revealed, you know, like, we kind of leave him at the door, but I think it's one of those ones where it's quality over quantity. He's used very well for the first half of the game, and then when we understand that actually we weren't us, the gamer, talking to Dr. Hill, we were Josh / the Psycho, because he just blends really well with the twists of Until Dawn. And then, yeah, it's just that thing, you're Sam, and if you were fortunate enough, like I wasn't on my blind playthrough, to not get caught by the Psycho, where you can find the extra clues in the game, yeah, he's literally just actual therapist on the phone, scared that he's going to go through with the decision, and then the whole thing speaks volumes. Not that we were creating our own horror game, I mean, we kind of were, but it's all to do with Josh's deteriorating mental health. And I just thought the storytelling and everything about Dr. Hill was just done like superbly well. And I don't think this is going to get topped for some time in terms of a narrator in a Supermassive game, or for any game in that matter. I just think Dr. Hill is one of the most underrated parts of like these choice-based or horror video games, and I think he's criminally underrated, where I don't think people speak about Dr. Hill enough, mate.
Oh yeah, like 100%. You know, another thing I was going to add, I know that we do get this with the Curator, like, because obviously the Curator is a constant figure throughout the series, and you know, when you finish the game, there's always a closing scene with him where, you know, he gives you details of how you did, and you know, sort of take The Devil in Me, for example. He says, oh, it's a wrap for Kate. It's sort of like for Erin, he says, oh, you know, she's gone to the great sweet audio sky, or something like that. She'll give up very specific things, but the amount of variation you can get with Dr. Hill as well. I'm thinking about, you know, when you're choosing what character you like the most and least.
Yeah.
And there's people talking about the different variations you get, whereby if you pick Josh as your least favourite, he'll give you a certain line. Whereas obviously, like, you know, I think it's fair to say that the majority of the players probably picked maybe Emily and Jess as their least favourite, given like how their characters were early doors in the game. If you do play it again and you know, mix around with it, like he'll give you different lines and different sort of like quirks in his behaviour, and I just totally dig that. You know, and on top of like the, you know, the different choices you can make with like the scarecrow photograph and, you know, the spider and the snakes and all that sort of thing. It's just really good stuff. I never get bored of playing them scenes, and I think I've probably seen them like 4 or 5 times now. If I had to pick, for me, Eliza is the weakest. I'll say the sort of like the good stuff first. I think that visually it's all very good. You know, I think the only slight distraction is maybe, I don't know if this is like a mocap thing, but when you look at Eliza, it doesn't look like she's looking at you on the screen. It's like her eyeballs are sort of like looking up at the ceiling, but you're like in front of her, which is a little bit off. But other than that, the visuals are great. I like where it's set. Obviously she's a fortune teller, and you know, there's the room's full of skulls, there's a crow, and it's very low lit, which I all like. But I think for me it comes back to this point of how Eliza was used. Now for me, she somewhat falls victim of the game that she's in. Not that the Quarry's bad, but for me, the fire with, you know, the travelling circus thing, and how she fits into that with Silas, who's a son, who's also a wolf. It felt like it didn't knit in with the plot of the Quarry, as well as, say, Dr. Hill, who is Josh's therapist, who has, you know, mental health problems, and you know, that's how that particular bit went. I think as well, like, you know, when you get the tarot cards, because that's basically her whole thing, isn't it? Reading the tarot cards. When she reads them to you, you don't get much more than that. She doesn't sort of go off on monologues and sort of talk about various things too much. She'll tend to read the tarot card and then go, oh, that's all we've got time for, so I'm going to let you get back to the game. And I don't know, it just left me wanting a bit more from her, considering like how, you know, how involved she is meant to be in this plot, if you get me.
Of course. Yeah, to echo what you said, I really like Eliza's setting, like the skulls in the background, the crow, the gramophone. I think that's another big thing as well. I think that gramophone theme to me is just really iconic. And I think that's one thing that she has over Dr. Hill, where she's kind of got that iconic sound about her, which Dr. Hill kind of doesn't, because that's just, it goes for more of the chilling silence, you know, which still blends really well for him. But there's just something really cool about Eliza having her own theme. It just makes her more unique. One thing that, yeah, like I also quite like is that it tried to set itself apart from other games, which I do respect, where it introduced the whole thing of not you picking up a totem and looking at it, but you would collect a tarot card and you would have to take it to her, and then choose whether to, have it seen or not. And it was different, and I quite liked it. Although, obviously, as you could probably echo in your case, Jack, it probably wasn't all that clear, because if you said no, I don't want a hand, then you're not really aware that you're just neglecting all the tarot cards you found. Also, I'm unsure if I like the element that if you found multiple, you could only look at one. Maybe that's a bit of a criticism. But yeah, I get what you mean, because with Dr. Hill, he was there from the get-go. He's there for 6 chapters, like with these meetings, and then he blends into the story really fantastically. Eliza's a bit interesting because you're meeting this odd lady at the end. You kind of gather, she might have to do something with that circus thing that you find a few clues for. But other than that, though, it's just constant. It doesn't evolve the way Dr. Hill does, the way his room deteriorates, the way that something doesn't feel quite off, whether you're questioning he's real or not. Eliza's just the same one-note thing throughout each chapter, and then when we do get to her and then her story does build up, it's all because of with a clue you might find where you'll get this random 5-minute section with her. And then it kind of just, the whole thing leads to whether you want to pull the trigger on Silas or not at the end. And we've openly discussed that we thought the ending of the Quarry is fairly weak. Like, it falls flat, and, the final third of the game, certainly in my opinion. And yeah, like, it's not really Eliza's fault. I think, it was really cool having a fortune teller in this game. And I think Grace Zabriskie crushes it. She's like a horror veteran. I loved her performance in Twin Peaks and the Child's Play movies. However, yeah, there's just something that doesn't quite hit right about Eliza compared to Dr. Hill, where it just feels very packed on at the end, where I just feel her story could have been interwoven within the whole thing a lot better. We have to learn through Travis about this whole thing about Kaylee and Caleb letting the wolf free in a bit of dialogue for, at the very end of the game. And I feel it just would have been better if this was done through maybe clue finding throughout the main characters. And that way it would have felt less just shoved on at the end as an explanation of why Eliza's here. I felt she needed to be interwoven into the story in a much more meaningful and kind of more qualitative way, if that makes any sense, Jack.
No, it does. I think, almost like to wrap up the video, I think it's fair to say that in conclusion, I think Eliza's a good narrator. I think Dr. Hill and the Curator are great, and I'm not just saying about them themselves, but also like how they're used. So yeah, but I suppose by default we're saying that Eliza's the weakest. Dr. Hill for me is perhaps the best, but then the Curator's got like an asterisk next to him because we're yet to see where his story goes, essentially. But at the same time, the Curator is a bit of a badass in the ring, and also he won Hunger Games, so maybe it levels out. With Dr. Hill. I don't know.
We'll be getting blockbusters from Supermassive Games in the future, and just to say that I really hope they don't steer away from this narrator thing that they keep giving us, because I really do enjoy it, and I hope we'll get a future blockbuster where we'll get to discuss them in the same manner that we have done in this video. And obviously, if you guys are watching, comment in on what you'd like to see from a narrator in these Supermassive blockbuster games. And let us know what you thought about our opinions. Who do you prefer, the Curator, Dr. Hill, or Eliza? Were there points that we said that you disagree with, or are there points that we forgot to mention that you guys would like to chime in with as well? I just find the narrator aspect of these games not talked about enough, and I'm just really fascinated by it. So it'll be really interesting for what you guys think.
Fantastic. All right, guys, we will see you next time.
Bye, guys. See you soon.